And we have reverse engineered that technology today. That's the theory. And NASA is just a smokescreen program. If we really have true anti-gravity technology today, why aren't we using it in our military? Why isn't it evident in the war in Iraq? Why don't we use it to demonstrate superiority on the planet? And if not, if all of this is just conspiracy theory and we really don't have this technology, again, are we willing to take the risk of losing air superiority on this planet by letting the Russians or the Chinese or some other country, even the Middle East, actually engineer this kind of UFO technology and conquer the world? Are we willing to take that chance?
Well, I think, as far as military applications, maybe they are being used already. Maybe we don't know. Maybe they're being used in a surveillance capacity. As far as weapons that could be associated with such vehicles, one would have to think that if the propulsion system is as sophisticated as it would need to be to have these vehicles just hover, stop, noiselessly take off at right angles, do 3 to 5 to 6 to 20,000 miles an hour, one would think that the military application would then take the form of, rather than rockets and projectiles, that probably a particle beam would be used, some kind of a laser, some kind of a disabling beam to disable equipment, to cause disorientation among men and troops. And of course, we have seen no evidence of this. I'm not sure that the U.S. military would want to play that card right now, because after all, the war in Iraq really is a conventional war. We have air superiority there already. There is no Iraqi Air Force. There was no Iraqi Air Force. We, in the United States, we have air superiority basically over the rest of the world. I'm sure there's some pretty hotshot MiG pilots in China and Russia. But I think if you put our Air Force up against any Air Force on this planet, we would prevail without the use of advanced technology of the type we're speaking of. So I think that the U.S., if they have these things, they would probably save them for a more drastic confrontation, perhaps a confrontation with beings that have the potential to be superior over us in terms of the applications of aviation today. So maybe these triangles, the big black deltas, the rectangles, are the next wave of the U.S. military's defense against what some might perceive as an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional threat. Maybe these weapons or these flight systems now are being prepared to confront a race of superior beings that could have designs on the planet that are malevolent. I think it was Lord Hill Norton, or one of the British Air Force Defense Ministry staff who was assigned to study UFOs in the 50s. After he retired, he said that in his estimation there were 23 different species of being visiting the planet in numerous types of vessels. We know from the NASA UFO studies that you've done, and I think that theory, there's nothing wrong with that theory that I can see that doesn't point to what you postulate, and that is that there are benevolent beings that are trying to heal the planet, hence the size of these ships that we're seeing in the STS cameras, and the fact that the ozone has holes in it, the fact that water could be a healing element there. What are these lifesaver-shaped little Dropostone-shaped ships conveying to our planet? Well, we see them coming into the atmosphere, and on the STS tapes and other forms of exposure, they're not releasing personnel, they're not releasing projectiles, and no harm has come to the planet, through their intervention. So one can assume perhaps that maybe there are benevolent beings out there and malevolent beings out there, and maybe the United States government is preparing weapon systems to deal with the malevolent beings, Ronald Reagan said in a speech, he said, what if there were a species from another planet that was threatening us? We would all find a way to work together. And one can only think about the Star Wars system and the fact that there we had satellite-mounted cannon. Well, they'd be good for shooting down rockets. They also might be good for shooting down other invasive vehicles that are coming into our atmosphere. Ronald Reagan himself spoke about a UFO sighting that he had when he was governor of California in the Beach King Air that they used to use. They were coming from Sacramento. His wife was with him, Sacramento to Los Angeles, and a saucer clocked the plane for a good 45 minutes. And Reagan spoke of it to a lot of people. And I think maybe, you know, part of his motivation in getting the Star Wars weapon system up might have been that to prepare ourselves for the day when other beings might come to this planet with designs of, who knows, taking minerals without authorization, taking people. You know, we're probably just going to have to wait to see.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Colonel Corso makes it clear that the Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative, appropriately dubbed Star Wars, was primarily designed for use against the alien intruders. His contemporary successor, the anti-missile missile defense system, is also being designed with that as one of its principal objectives. It is true that a case can be made for attempting to provide a shield against the Russians and Chinese, although everyone knows that the Russians are not going to embark on a policy which would result in their total destruction. It is equally true that they, too, are aware of the visitors and know that the perceived threat from the visitors has been a major consideration in the planning of the anti-missile system.
And the incident in question, as at least from my perspective, almost ignited a nuclear war, and that was 5 unidentified objects were picked up on radar coming in over the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, Southern Washington, Oregon area. As these objects approached the coast, Strategic Air Command went on a alert. We were in a defense condition, or what is referred to as a DEFCON, Defense Condition 3, which means that the nuclear forces were ready, but they weren't on a ready stated alert. We elevated that to Defense Condition 4. Defense Condition 5 is launch. When we went on our alert, the Russians were also monitoring our nuclear armed forces as we were theirs. And so they knew that our bombers had gone to fail-safe. They knew that the launch codes had been given. They also knew that the hatches on the ICBM missiles had been removed and that we were getting ready to do a launch. I know that Nixon, President Richard Milhouse Nixon, picked up the phone and called the Kremlin. The White House notified the Kremlin that these objects were not, and I repeat, not a preemptive launch by us, that they too, the Russians, had been tracking these objects as they came in over the Bering Sea.
Probably moved 100 miles in a matter of a second or two.
When we look at alien abduction, I mean, the idea of a human being being taken and having an implant inserted into their body, I often think of how biologists, how we tag whales. You know, we put a chip on a whale and we can track them via satellite, and also how, you know, we go into a frog's pond and we pull out the frog and we spread it out on the table. Remember in biology class we used to do this, and, you know, stick the little needles in his legs and cut him open. mean, that's how we look at another life form in another world. So is it really a sign of violence and negativity that an extraterrestrial civilization is coming to Earth and doing the same to us, putting computer chip implants on us to track us, know where we are, study our species, do a little bit of biological experimentation? I mean, I know for us it's horrific. I mean, it's absolutely a violent thing for us as humans. But from their perspective, do you really think that they're being violent?
Well, again, I have to go back to some of them might be here for good purpose.
And that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge
And some are here for selfish purposes. Maybe these abductions, even though they're done in a objective but biological way, like we dissect frogs, maybe they're doing it just for fun and for sport. I mean, I don't know. I think probably that that the fear could be justified in some senses. Anne Druffel has written this book about how to prevent being abducted. And we really think, even if benevolent species coming to this planet and taking a man and a woman and taking ova out of a woman and sperm out of a man, that's tremendously invasive and very traumatic for the human beings. So even if the motives are good, these actions are as violent as anyone we're capable of on the planet. I think that a certain amount of fear is justified. If you look at Day the Earth Stood Still, the first thing that happens is the army is assembled and guns are shot at these beings and at the ship.
I addressed the question to Dick Cheney because I say the most important question to put to any high-ranking official is not what do you think about UFOs or have you seen one. The most important question is, have you ever been briefed on the subject? Did someone walk in your office and tell you what's going on? Because if someone walks into the president's office or some high-ranking official and briefs him on the subject of UFOs, it is for real. It's not imaginary, as the government has been saying for 60 years. So I asked Mr. Cheney, this is 3 months after he became the vice president, I asked him on the air, and this is still on Diane Ream's archives, Mr. Cheney, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? And if so, when was it and what were you told? And Mr. Cheney said, if I had been briefed on that subject, it probably would have been classified and I wouldn't be talking about it.
January 22nd, 1997, I noticed 3 amber orbs now at a distance far west on the horizon. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, even though they're in a line formation, they were amber, they were in a formation, they were hovering for minutes. And as I'm pointing like this, they reappear in the same spot. And I thought, I have to get a picture of this. And I ran upstairs, I grabbed my 35mm, get out onto the balcony. As I'm ready to shoot the 3 bottom orbs, suddenly 6 amber orbs in a row, totally equidistant from each other, massive span across, pop up.
On March 13, 1997, over 10,000 Arizona residents witnessed the single most spectacular UFO sighting in the 20th century. Headlines surged the nation, and Arizona residents demanded answers from military and state officials. A mile-wide UFO was seen from as far north as Flagstaff, Arizona, and then the giant triangular UFO hovered above the great city of Phoenix, Arizona, where Dr. Lynn Kitai shot this amazing videotape. When we go out into space and we're exploring the cosmos out there and we're looking for signs of extraterrestrial life, what kind of a communication are we going to send out? I mean, if Dan Aykroyd was the ambassador, if you were the ambassador for Earth, what message would you teletype to ET?
If I were to speak for mankind to these beings that were coming here, I guess what I would say is, let's go to some neutral place. Let's have a meeting with scientists from all around the world leaders. Let's sit down and basically have a sort of a forum with you, the extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings. Let's sit down and kind of get to know each other. And, human instinct is pretty good. And I think, it would almost like be a sort of a G8 style kind of summit with world leaders, scientific leaders, and these beings. And you'd sit down with them and, after about a week, or even a couple of days, or maybe a few hours, you would really sort of get a sense of what they're up to. But of course, childhood's end, Arthur C. Clarke's great story. It looked like these beings were benevolent, even though they had a malevolent appearance. And in the end, we find out that they meant no good for our planet. So, I think it's important that some branches of the military and police be briefed on these in a very real sense, and be told, they are real, people are being abducted, there is mind control in play here, and that we do have to be vigilant. Now, if we knew that there was a purely benevolent race, like if something happened in Iraq where all of the electronics went out in the American military and all of the insurgents' rifles jammed, or we saw all of the polluted waters in North Carolina from the pig farming completely healed overnight, and different signs like this, then we would know we're dealing with a benevolent species, and then we could really be open and welcome. But then again, we would have to be cautious, because beings with that much power could give the impression that they're here to help when really they're not. So the verdict is out on all this. We just don't know which ones are benevolent, which ones are malevolent, and the degree to which they're going to continue interacting with our planet. But what would really help is if the United States military and police and government open it up to their staffs and say, look, this is something we really do have to consider, because, maybe the defense, the survival of our species could well be at stake. If you look at the history, from, say, Ken Arnold's first sighting in '47, going back to the Bible, Ezekiel's wheel, going back to the medieval manifestations of little saucers and UFOs, that painting of the Madonna that's very famous, in which it appears, up to now, there have been no mass murders by these beings. There's been no mass destruction of cities, but hundreds of thousands of people have been taken out of their lives, subjected to surgical experimentation, released back into the population, and are suffering trauma today for it. That is not good.
The idea, like in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the meeting on the dark side of the moon in Devil's Tower, Wyoming, it seems like the logical thing to do. We have a communication, a teletype message, we have a place, a location, and a time, and we isolate it from the public until we know it's safe. We check each other out. This seems like the most logical thing to do, even rather than meeting on the White House lawn. This is the way we would like it to happen. But that doesn't seem to be the way it's really happening. These extraterrestrials don't seem to be so interested in doing things politically the way we do things on Earth. They're picking certain individuals to contact. They are zeroing in on those individuals. But now, there are so many sightings going on all over the planet. It's just amazing. Iran, Turkey, Mexico, Venice, California, Sonora, California, Texas, Death Valley. The reports are coming in every other day now. It seems like we're heading towards an omega point. What is about to happen? Is this all just a coincidence that more and more people have video cameras, or do you really think there's a major unprecedented communication that is about to happen between our extraterrestrial visitors and humanity? Or again, is it the video camera question? More camcorders?
There are definitely more video cameras out there, and definitely more sightings and definitely more credible witnesses. You know, the biggest thing in ufology in the 60s was Herb Shermer, the Nebraska Highway Patrolman, who was at the Ashland Oil tank farm out there in Nebraska, and he writes in his diary, you know, saw flying saucer, and then under hypnosis, turned out that he was taken aboard and informed of their intentions. Barney and Betty Hill. I mean, these were the key cases. Shermer, Barney and Betty Hill, the Pascagoula incident, Travis Walton. Now there are hundreds of cases like this, and I think that because it's in the consciousness, because we have, you know, a poll saying basically half of the world believes and half doesn't. We're reaching a point where, as Stephen Bassett talks about his time clock, it's like the nuclear time clock that we had in the 50s before we blew the world, you know, before we blew the world up. The theory that once the hands got to midnight, that's when all the nuclear weapons in the world would be discharged. Well, we've stopped that nuclear clock, thankfully. But as far as the UFO clock, he says we're 1 minute to midnight now. Meaning that in a minute to midnight, something really, really spectacular is going to happen. Now, whether that's a mass appearance, whether that is, you know, come over to the Yankee Stadium during a game, I think possibly the next, maybe even in the next 5 years, we're going to have occasions like the one I experienced in upstate New York in the mid-'80s when I woke up in the middle of the night and I said to my wife, they're calling me, I want to go outside, they want me to come outside and see. She said, who? Something outside wants me to come out and say, oh, just go back to bed. I went back to bed, but in the next day in the media, in newspapers, in radio, all over upstate New York and Ontario and Quebec and Vermont, people spoke about this urge they had to go out of their houses at 3 in the morning and look up into the sky. And 12,000 people shared this urge. And they went out and it was a big, big news story. And of course the Air Force said that a Chinese rocket had exploded over New York State. And what people saw was a massive, miles-high pink spiral in the sky above the Great Lakes. In Hull, Quebec, Canada, a few years afterwards, there was a story of several hundred people, almost 1,000 people in this community, Gatineau, north of Hull, Quebec, Canada, in the Quebec province, sharing this urge to come outside and look up into the sky, and they also saw an apparition. So there are going to be more of these mass sightings. And, you know, the day that 1 million people in Idaho at a rock concert or something see it, that is when you're going to really get the conventional military and police sitting down to say, well, it's time to throw the Brookings Institution report out and lay it open to the people and let the people decide, you know, what must be done in conference with our state leaders.
And that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge
national security, and if they did, would they classify it to protect the national security? So I would have to say, no, I couldn't agree to non-disclosure. I really couldn't if I saw something or photographed something. But I can see where other people, you know, wanting to do the best for their country, wanting to serve their country in a legitimate way would say, yes, I will not disclose. And this is based on the Brookings Institution report from the late 50s, which, you know, Congress commissioned, which said that if the existence of UFOs were revealed to the American populace would not be able to handle it. They would defy church authority, police authority, military authority, governmental authority. They wouldn't go to work. They would sort of cast aside the mayors and governors and presidents and go, we want to talk directly to these beings. We feel that these beings should, you know, have their case put to us directly by them themselves. I think the American populace today is ready to handle the concept that what we live in, the 4 dimensions of height, length, width, and time, is not all there is. There are more dimensional realities. There are advanced beings with machines that can skip from dimension to dimension, from galaxy to galaxy, using the Einstein-Rosen bridges, the wormholes. I think the American people, I think half of them know, and I think the other half, with the proper evidence, would be ready to accept it. It's going to take a mass sighting for the U.S. government to finally say, look, we're going to come on side with France, Belgium, Mexico, Turkey, Iran, and we're going to tell the truth, and we're going to reveal what happened to Tom Mantell when he went up in his P-51, what happened in the Great Lakes when I believe it was an F-104, I believe, was scrambled over the Great Lakes in the 60s. What happened to him? You know, I think that that if you have that type of sighting, then there'll be no choice.
Interdimensional travel. I mean, not just traveling through our dimension, but going into alternate dimensions, Dan. Would you, and if you could, a spaceship arrives in your yard, and you know you've got the barbecue out, and there's the steak on the grill, and they want you right now to come with them and go into another dimension, and to move forward and backwards on the timeline, to go forward in time and backward in time. If you could move forward and backward in time, are there any events in human history that you would interfere with, that you would change to alter the destiny and the course of humanity?
Well, I wouldn't want to go back in time and change anything, because that would be a tampering that I wouldn't serve mankind well. Although there are many horrors, of course. Wouldn't you have loved to have caught Hitler as a 15-year-old and have him drown in a river? You know, because then we could have solved the Holocaust problem, and then World War II may not have, well, look, there were 2 guys. There was Otto Dinkel. You ever heard of him? Well, he was an orator hired by the German army, just like Hitler was, to speak. If Hitler died, maybe Otto Dinkel would have been the guy that would have gone on with this rabid anti-Semitism and wiped out 9 million people. Of course one thinks of those things, but you don't want to go back in time and play with events, because, you know, where we've come to today and the improvements we've made in human rights and in regarding ourselves as sacred, they've come because of the bad things that have happened. Now, if I went into the future, I would want to see where this planet is 300 years from now. Did we make it? Did we make it? That's what I would like to know.
I mean that from the rational characteristics of terrestrial intelligence, rather than the unknown rational ethics of extraterrestrial intelligence.
Interdimensionality, again, if you could move forward and backward in time and meet any personality, any public figure, celebrity, or politician, or mystical figure, is there anybody that you would like to sit down with? If you could have lunch with them, or just sit down and talk to them and have a discussion, forward and backward in time?
Oh, I'd love to spend an afternoon with Richard Feynman. Would love to sit down with Heisenberg, and of course, you know, Einstein, Niels Bohr, Max Planck. You know, I'd love to sit with the particulate, the quantum physics guys, because there really is the root of understanding how and why the world is the way it is, and the joy of these studies in antimatter that are occurring.
Everyone you picked is a physicist, a scientist, and I often think about how spirituality and science are merging, how they're kind of coming together. I mean, what ancient civilizations thought of a universe was really the Earth and the Sun and a few planets. And now with the advent of the Hubble telescope, we can see that the universe is far bigger than the ancients had ever imagined. So while science and religion are merging on some ideas, in other areas they're just far off. But to make matters even more complicated, the idea of parallel dimensions or parallel universes, I mean, It's just getting so vast out there. How do you map a multiverse?
You know, I've talked to some guys, they say that fifth dimension, sixth dimension, could be right here by my ear and could be a millimeter wide and a millimeter across. You don't, you know, because you're talking about, you know, dimensions that defy any kind of dimensional understanding. And, you know, there was I forget his name, he died recently, in the last 2 years, but he proposed that there are parallel realities just because of the way we go through time. Like, here we are in this interview right now. Well, what I said and what you said and what we all did 2 minutes ago still exists somewhere. Because we just did it. It's there. It's like a wake we've left. And if you had a time vehicle, you could go back to 2 minutes before and stop and see what we're doing 2 minutes before. You go back to your high school days. You go back to your days as an infant. And those realities are still existing alongside what we're progressing through. You know, it's all a beautiful, beautiful mystery. I am here because I am a writer, a performer. I find it entertaining. I'm not a scientist. You know, and I'm not a theosopher or philosopher. And you know, I am just here because it is enormously, enormously entertaining. And mysteries like this are challenging. And it's really, really fun to contemplate that, you know, there may be beings out there who are concerned about our planet and who may give us the opportunity to advance ourselves. It's just really fun to contemplate. All the physics that we know on this planet, quantum physics and conventional physics and metallurgy and you know, all of it, it can really encompass a theory of how these ships move. I mean, you've done it yourself, David, proposing, you know, that if you can convert, you know, a mass to a state of, you know, of photonic energy, then there is no mass anymore, and you're looking at pure light. You're looking at anti-gravity. You're looking at something that can be, you know, harnessed in waves. Well, what is the fuel? Well, people, you know, Bob Lazar talked about, you know, this element 115 that was put into these generators to boil mercury and to be used as gravity tractors. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I mean, they must be using a fuel that's unavailable to us. Does it give off radioactive waste? What is the cost to them? For instance, the Venice UFO that you recently showed me, and I covet that tape. That's amazing. Because you see the metallic quality of the object, you see the force field around it, you see it spinning.
It was May 2nd, 2004, approximately 11:30 a.m. And I was walking from my apartment with my girlfriend down this alley right here. And we were just sort of walking this way, and I looked up over at those phone lines, and we saw something that we really couldn't make sense of. It was a very shiny, you know, metallic disc. So we turned the corner here, and this is basically where we're just looking at it. And we're pretty much like, okay, that's not a balloon or anything we're familiar with. So we sort of kept walking to the corner and just stared at it for a while until it hit me, you know, that this was really something. There was a man also looking at it, sort of a bystander, and he said, wow, do you guys see that? And that's when I realized all three of us were looking at something extraordinary.
What is the environmental cost of running these machines? Are they clean or are they not? Is there some, wherever, you know, they came from, is there some place they have to go back to after their journeys are finished to dump whatever they've used up in terms of fuel, like we would a bad fuel rod in a reactor? That is a question I'd like to know. I'd like to ask is, you know, are you a clean burning vessel, or is there some cost that you pay like we paid for atomic energy?
When we consider that it may be possible to take mass and reduce it down to zero, make it as light as a photon, we can start to approach this whole light speed phenomena from a whole new direction. I mean, we're going to be able to do this. This is the only logical answer. There are no fissile nuclear materials in the universe as we know it to produce the kind of energies in a steady stream that you need to get mass up to that speed. There are no fissile nuclear fuels that can produce 1 trillion electron volts all day long. And wormholes are even more exotic. The idea of bending and folding two spaces of space-time together and creating a shortcut wormhole to vector in between those 2 points, according to Kip Thorne, who wrote Black Holes and Time Warps, that the energy required for a wormhole is 100 million suns, the negative energy they put out for an entire year. There are 100 million suns in our galaxy alone. That means all of the negative solar energy coming from our suns in this whole galaxy, the total energy for a whole year is required to create a wormhole. Where has any extraterrestrial civilization or our civilization going to get access to levels of energy that high? It's never going to happen. That's why I've reversed the table here. I said, you have to ultimately get frustrated with the idea of increasing energy en masse. You have to it's like banging your head against the wall and trying to cram it through the wall. You will never be able to do it this way. So the new way, as I propose, is to make this all possible. And when you consider UFOs coming in, stopping on a dime, and then accelerating and turning out into space, any Air Force pilot can tell you that stopping on a dime, the G-forces are going to throw you right through the walls.
Yeah, you'll be crushed.
And then sudden acceleration is going to do the same thing. It's going to destroy the body of the pilot. So this new approach and this new idea, I mean, this is just the inception, it's just the beginning, but I think this is really the only avenue that we can look down right now and the only way we can see solving this problem.